Bum ba da da dum dum bum 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 ba da 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 yum ba da. In case you didn't guess, I'm going to talk about Superman today. Um, so Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster ran a comic for New Adventure Comics called Federalman back in 1936. Um, in 1937, they ran one Federalman of the Future. Basically, it was a hypothetical. The main character on Federalman was hypothetically thinking what the future of crime fighting would be like. And in this hypothetical universe that he was thinking about, there's a character named Jor-El. Supposedly, this was crime fighting in the year 3000. Jor-El, of course, is sort of the pattern for Superman's father, Jor-El of Krypton. Only, the original concept, he was from Earth. Interesting, one of the early titles of Superman was the Man of Tomorrow. So he is the descendant of this Jor-El, who is, originally concept was a man of the future, federal man of the future. So, a little interesting there. So we're really talking more about the origins of Superman than anything else. Always liked comic books. Thought I'd go back and look into some of this stuff because Golden Age comic books are a lot different from modern day comic books. And woohoo. So DC has republished some of their Golden Age, so I bought a couple and I've been reading them. And actually, DC on their main website, they ran some of the original Superman from the newspaper a few years back. And that's when I first noticed, Superman in the past was a lot different from Superman today. And so I bought their reprints of some of the original books to read, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. Now, everyone knows Superman's backstory. It was told in about 3 frames in the original comic book. Let's see what we got here. We've got the ship flying back from the planet blowing up. A little, one brief panel talking about how some drivers found the baby and took it to an orphanage. And then at the orphanage, he showed powers. And eventually he became Superman. So that one page of his backstory. How does he get his powers? Well, first of all, everyone on Krypton has these powers. They're all an advanced civilization. None of this red sun versus yellow sun or anything like that. And it compares them to grasshoppers and says, yeah, look, insects can lift weights much larger than their own size. So can Kryptonians, because they're advanced. So if you go to the official DC Wiki page or whatever, and you start looking up names, it'll credit Action Comics #1 with stuff like the Kents and first appearance of Jor-El and stuff like that. And it'll have in parentheses mention only. So, it doesn't actually show their picture, it just mentions them, and it doesn't even mention them by name. It just says some people passing by found the baby and took him to the orphanage. And that was the Kent's mention. Not overly exciting. Now then, we immediately jump to... After his introduction, we jump to this great scene of him running down the street, carrying a woman who's tied up and bound and gagged, and then he leaves her outside and runs to the governor's mansion and tells the governor, you have a woman on death row who is she's going to be executed in like 15 minutes. You got to stop it. I've got a confession here. The real woman who did it is tied up outside. I just left it there. Way to go, Clark. And then it immediately sort of jumps from there to another story altogether. So the first Action Comics #1 jumped around a bit when they introduced Superman. A few other interesting facts here is, let's see, Lois Lane was introduced in Action Comics #1. This was all in June of 1938. George Taylor. So Clark worked for it was the Daily Star at that time. It wasn't called the Daily Planet. The editor's name was George Taylor. They go about a year and a half before they say that. It's just the editor, the editor, the editor. About a year and a half later, he sends a telegram back home because he's out on assignment. And on the telegram it says, to the Daily Star, editor George Taylor. This is where we first learned George Taylor's name. Again, you go to any official sites or whatever, and they'll say George Taylor was introduced in Action Comics #1. Well, technically he was just never given a name back then. Now then, the newspaper started running Superman January 16th, 1939. They went into his backstory a little more. So we actually see Jor-El and Kara-El. And again, we see it starts out with Jor-El in his lab. And then it's like, oh, I have to get home. So he runs down the street at super speed and he jumps 3 stories to his apartment. And so you can see Kryptonians all have this great power that Superman has. It has nothing to do with being on Earth or being under a different sun or whatever. Originally, all Kryptonians had these powers. They actually go through the story of Krypton blowing up. They go through the story of Jonathan and Martha Kent finding him. Him growing up a little under them. So they go through a little more detail. They actually give George Taylor's name. He does work for the Star, etc. Didn't get called the Daily Planet until the 1940s, and then shortly after then, Perry White took over as the editor. Just for your information. Action Comics #6, November 1938. Supposedly they introduced Jimmy Olsen. Their introduction of Jimmy Olsen is an inquisitive editorial boy, or outside the editor's store, an inquisitive office boy has been getting an earful. Doesn't give his name, never appears for like another 2 or 3 years. It's just an inquisitive office boy. And again, the people who run the databases just say, that was Jimmy Olsen the whole time. Okay, that's fine. So Clark was originally, Superman was a bit of a vigilante. People saw him as a myth, supposedly. And they did weird things like, social justice issues. And the problem, crime is so bad as we have slums and these people just can't crawl out of the slums. So I'm going to destroy the slums and the government will come and repay and rebuild. And so Superman did. He was considered at one point a criminal because he would run around and he would just destroy stuff. It's like that was the solution was, man's not going to fix this on his own, so I'm just going to destroy it and force man to fix it. Real nice Superman. There was one issue, he's gonna go against bad drivers. And so he's running around, he's pulling people out of their car and threatening them, and very non modern day Superman activities. He goes to a car manufacturer and it's like, I think you're using inferior parts, so I'm just going to destroy your factory and force you to rebuild. And he just starts doing all this stuff, and it's like, technically he's a criminal, but the police are sort of like, but we're sort of glad he's doing this, so we're not gonna go after him as much. So again, like I said, Superman of the 1930s was not the Superman of today. Very obviously. Weird. I've also started reading some of the old Batmans, and the idea Batman was an urban legend wasn't the way it was run in the Golden Age. In fact, the police knew who he was. He wasn't considered a vigilante. They all loved him. People, oh, it's a Batman. It's everyone knew about him. Superman, on the other hand, people thought, oh, this is just some mythical figure people are making up. Even though he was in the newspapers, he was more of a vigilante than Batman in the Golden Age. It's like this whole big role reversal. Reading the modern stuff compared to the Golden Age stuff, it's completely different than you would expect. Superman got his own, he was in Action Comics for a while, then he eventually he was still in Action Comics actually after this, but he eventually was given his own title. So Superman magazine came out January 6th, that was when he ran in the newspapers. June 1939 was the #1 issue of Superman magazine. We jump back to his backstory again. This time, he gets 2 pages on his backstory now. So he's like, there he is. Rocket's leaving. Still don't tell Jor-El. Parents find him, take him to the orphanage. This time they go back. And they say, we want to adopt him after all. We found this kid. So now the people who found him have officially become his parents or his foster parents. Her name is Mary. His name, they don't give. So again, we only have one of his parents' names now. Flip over to the next page. He grows up. He does great feats of strength, etc., etc., etc. And then, before he becomes Superman, his parents die, or his foster parents die. So, again, not your modern day, I sort of like the Kents, modern day stuff, going back to, you can always talk to the Kents and, get the whole parental influence and all that. Old stuff, now, they died before he became Superman. So, he doesn't get their advice other than his father said, we think you're special, you should hide your powers until you're ready to show them. Interesting thing, then. As he's doing stuff, he hears someone talking about how they framed a woman and how she's on death row. So he goes and he finds the woman who helped frame him. And he captures her. And if you remember from the original thing I showed, it is actually the same woman in the same dress. So it's interesting. They retell his story and they pick up the same crime that he was working on. They give more backstory on the crime. They don't just have it start in the middle. So it's sort of nice that they decided to go back and do this. Let's fill in some of the gaps that we left on his original origin story. That was sort of nice in my opinion. Now, DC Comics. They made a documentary called Origin Stories, where they sort of go through the history of DC Comics. And it's sort of interesting. Now, one of them, one of the people they interview is a woman who works for DC. And she's talking, not only did we have Superman, we had Lois Lane, and we have a strong woman reporter, etc., etc., and gotta wonder if this woman actually went back and read any of the original Golden Age. So, again, the newspapers were sort of different from the original, the comic books themselves. So in the newspapers, Lois Lane wrote for the advice for the Lovelorn column basically, and she wanted to be a reporter, and she kept getting shot down. And she would go out, get in trouble, Superman would save her. That was like the basic plot over and over. And the end of every adventure pretty much ended with Clark telling Lois, "Well, back to advice for the Lovelorn." So no, the original Lois was not this strong character. She was this reporter wannabe who sort of fumbled into trouble and gave Superman a reason for existing almost. In the comic books, they vaguely made references to her. Yeah, they didn't come straight out and say she writes advice for the Lovelorn. Not right away, at least. They, sort of vaguely. She was, she would talk and she would be talking about how I just read a sob story, or it wasn't as strongly emphasized as it was in the newspapers. But they did eventually come out. It was like again about 2 years after the series started. They did come out and officially say yes, she basically writes for the advice for the Lovelorn. Occasionally, when Clark went out on a story, Clark wanted to date her for some reason, and she kept shooting him down because she thought he was a wimp, because he was acting like a wimp, because he wanted to hide his secret identity. But occasionally he would go out on an assignment and he would talk to his editor, George Taylor, and would be like, can I take Lois to get the feminine perspective? So that was her reporting job, was to get the feminine perspective on the story. Not overly exciting. Again, she wasn't the strong character people made her out to be, or people want to make her out to be, or that she is today. Not to criticize modern day Lois Lane, but trying to compare modern day Lois Lane to Golden Age Lois Lane, it doesn't work out as well as most people want. So his first supervillain, and should be understood, comic books of this age, they were primarily westerns, science fiction, and there was another category that came up, and I can't remember what it is. But there weren't superheroes in the sense that we think of superheroes. And so most of, he crime stories, that was the third one. So most of this was him fighting crime. But then to give it more the science fiction element, they had introduced the Ultra Humanite. And he was basically a scientist trying to take over the world. He was introduced, let me see here, July 1939, Action Comics number 13. And it was sort of revealed that he's behind a lot of crimes. He's trying to take over the world and raise money for it. And most of what he's doing is just standard racket. Basically, I send out thugs, they beat someone up, they collect money, but he did have he was a mad scientist. He had the devices that he could try to kill Superman with, as opposed to the normal, let's just shoot him and then throw our gun at him afterwards. He was supposed to be crippled. He was in a wheelchair. Basically, the idea was to make him the opposite of Superman. Superman had super strength and super physical abilities, and the Ultra Humanite was a super genius, but was physically crippled. They eventually had him. He always escaped. Superman never caught him until eventually they had Superman. He tried to shoot Superman with a laser gun, which backfired and blew him up, supposedly. Again, supposedly he can always come back. Silver Age, they reintroduced the Ultra Humanite and had him put himself in gorilla bodies and stuff like that, and made him more interesting. But like I said, this was Golden Age. He was just a mad scientist. He was replaced by Alexi Luthor, who This was, when was this? This was May 1940. And again, Luthor was just a mad scientist at the time. He was not the businessman or anything of the Bronze Age. He was just mad scientist trying to take over the world. For the entire Golden Age, all of Superman's enemies or criminals were just that. They were criminals or mad scientists. There were no people with superpowers. The people of the modern age that you would see would be Lex Luthor, the Prankster, the Toy Man, and Mr. Mxyzptlk, or however you want to pronounce it. Mixie was the only one who had any powers of his own. The others were just, like I said, mad scientists at the time. Some of them have been rewritten and made into stronger characters, or villains with powers of their own, as opposed to just gadgets. And that's most of the Golden Age. Again, like I said, they were mostly crime stories, detective stories, so you didn't start seeing villains with superpowers right away. There were a few who might be considered to have superpowers, but for the most part, they were just gangsters or mad scientists. Anything else? Kryptonite. Kryptonite was first introduced in the radio broadcast in 1943. It wasn't used in the comic books until 1949. So, we didn't have this magic rock that can stop Superman. That's what I was... Speaking of stopping Superman, that's what I'm forgetting. So, Ultra Humanite. First time he encounters Superman, he burns the building that he was in as he's running away. He's like, blow up the building, destroy him. So they light the building on fire and get on their plane and fly away. And Superman makes it out and he's like, whew, glad I didn't burn to death. And it's like, wait a second. Golden Age Superman could be killed by fire? And apparently he could. Another point, they actually mentioned something to the effect, bullets can't penetrate him. Nothing short of a, like 33-pound shell can penetrate his skin. Is one of the things they originally introduced him with, which of course modern day Superman, not even that'll work. But they actually had one where there was an explosion and it knocked Superman unconscious. Then of course, he was in a foreign country at the time, and they said, okay, now that we've got him unconscious, let's take him and put him in front of a firing squad, because the explosion didn't kill him, maybe the bullets will. This was back when, like I said, Superman wasn't as well known. Even though stories were in the paper about him, he was still considered mythological, so a lot of the people didn't know that bullets couldn't kill him right off the bat. So, being in a foreign country, being put in front of a firing squad, I'll give him that one. And so that's basically it. Like I said, it was a completely different story. X-ray vision, again, it was about maybe 2 years into it where they showed him actually using X-ray vision for the first time. Super hearing they used a little earlier. Still didn't have the laser eyes for a while. Like I said, it was just very vastly different storyline than what we would see in Superman today. He wasn't as complete, not as indestructible as he is today. He is not, his villains were not as villainous. Metallo and Brainiac and, his more powerful villains who could actually do some damage weren't introduced until the Silver Age. That's about it. Just wanted to talk about Superman a little bit. Thank you and have a good day.